Glad to have you with us today. Big weekend. I know many of you are busy today for reasons other than coming into a worship service, but we're thankful that you got your priorities right, man. Show up. And all of you folks, good people out in the online audience, thanks for joining us. All of our campuses, we're glad you're tuning in. And big day, super weekend day. So I thought it would be appropriate to begin with Pastor Tom's Airtight Super Bowl prediction. All right, you ready to go? Take some notes, fill in some blanks. I'm just kidding, there are no blanks for this. But first of all, let's talk about last year. Last year, the Eagles won the Super Bowl. Just want to tell you, the word eagle or eagles, those words are found 29 times in the Bible. While the word patriot or patriot show up like nowhere in the Bible, nowhere. So I knew the Eagles had to win last year's Super Bowl. It wasn't 29-0, but it was okay. Eagles win. But the word ram or rams shows up in the Bible 168 times. So here's the biblical prediction, 168-0 Rams. But we know that's probably not going to happen, right? So we have to look a bit more deeply into this idea we call numerology. There are 3 digits in 168, 3 being the number of perfection in Scripture. So the Rams will evidently ruin Tom Brady's perfect game by taking the ball away 3 times. So let's move the 3 into the Patriots column. And then let's divide the Rams number by that same number, 3. And there you have my prediction, 56-30 Rams, simple math, bank it, Pastor Tom's Airtight, lockdown, Super Bowl prediction. Thank you. This is a full service ministry we provide here. And also the word fool shows up a bunch of times in the Bible, and that's what you'll be if you put money on that number. Anyway, here's hoping, right? Okay. Well, we've come to, we got bigger fish to fry than the Super Bowl today. Sermon on the Mount's a big deal. Big deal in the New Testament. It's a big deal for us. It's the longest recorded sermon that our Savior Jesus delivered. You know, I noticed, as I shared last time, we launched this series last weekend. I noticed that everybody seems to like Jesus, even people who don't like us. People don't like the church, they don't like Christians, but they have no problem with Jesus. In fact, he has become, in many circles, a cult hero. And the reason that they like him, and he's heroic to them, is because they have no idea what he said. If they knew what he said, they'd back off their support. Now, I've often shared with people, and you are my people. I've often shared with y'all my theological bias, and here you go. Jesus was right about everything. And so when we come to the words in the Sermon on the Mount, we agree with them before we even read them. That's not true in the world. There seems to be a general strategy of the enemy. I notice this. I picked this vibe up in conversations I have, and this is what the enemy tells the world. Go ahead and like Jesus, just make sure you don't listen to him. But the Sermon on the Mount is pretty clear. Contains many of those things people would be surprised to hear. In fact, some of you last weekend were surprised to hear those first 2 lines that he opened the sermon with. And so it is this calendar year, 2019, that our teaching team picked this sermon, his best known sermon, his least understood sermon, certainly his most controversial sermon. And we're going to look at it throughout the course of the year. Going to be in and out of it, but looking at these 3 full chapters, Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7, 107 verses long. And I'm excited because it's going to be a good year for that. All right, let's pick up the action once again by way of review. Verse 1 of Matthew chapter 5. He saw the crowds. Jesus went up on a mountainside and sat down. And his disciples came to him, and he began to teach them, saying, "Blessed." And you got to understand what that word blessed means. It doesn't just mean that you're blessed. You know, we tell people, have a blessed day. How you doing, man? I'm blessed. Seriously? See, this word makarios in the Greek, it actually means supremely happy. So how you doing? I'm supremely happy. I hope that's true because that's what Jesus wanted for you. Makarios comes from the Greek word Macar. And Jesus says that there are 8 things that bring Macar into our life, that bring happiness into our lives. Things that we would have never even thought about, especially in this culture. Because for virtually all of us, and I think this is true for y'all, it's true for me, way too often, our circumstances hold us hostage. Things are going good, bills are paid, feeling well, people are generally cooperative, we're pretty happy. Our team wins the big game, we're happy. Our team loses, maybe we're struggling financially, maybe we're struggling physically, maybe our relationships are stretched these days, and all of a sudden we get grumpy. See, whatever the circumstances are, those circumstances dictate how we're feeling, happy or no. And Jesus finds that reality particularly unsettling, that you and I would have such little faith in him, that we would have such little faith in his ability to orchestrate your difficulties, to orchestrate the difficulties of life for me in order to create better outcomes for us. Youth pastor years ago, I think it was a former life, can't even remember that far back unless I really try, but I do remember standing up in front of groups of young people and saying that Jesus wanted more, for them, wanted more than anything else that they would have a blast in life. He wants us to be happy. And that surprised them. It might surprise you. Jesus wants more than anything that your confidence in his ability to eternally provide for you and to protect you, that confidence would outweigh any fear this world would provoke in your spirit. See. In fact, these 8 statements Jesus begins this sermon with are called the Beatitudes. These are attitudes we got to be. That's not why they call them Beatitudes. But I thought that was kind of a cool little way of looking at them. The word beatitude means supreme happiness. So how are we going to become supremely happy? Everybody wants that. Everybody wants supreme happiness. In fact, when you tell people you're a Christian, they're excited for you because that's your road to happiness. But this is the thing. They think they can find happiness without Jesus. Y'all can't find happiness without Jesus. He's the only one who can give it to you. He said in John chapter 14, verse 6, he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. The way, the truth, and the life. You'll notice Jesus never said, I'm just one path to happiness. I'm one path to eternal life. He said, I am the path. You want eternal life? You want to see the Father? You got to come by me. The only road to heaven is over my dead body, Jesus said. And you want happiness? You can't get that except through him either. Jesus claimed uniqueness in terms of a path to eternity, a path to happiness. And we discovered last weekend that happiness is both a decision and an impression. In fact, you make a decision, Jesus gives you happiness. See, you can't find happiness, but you can receive it on the basis of how you choose to live your life. So you make a decision, Jesus blesses you with happiness, and then the world is impressed. There's an impression. Those 8 to 15 people sitting on the front row of your life are impressed. They notice how your life is different. Your life is different than theirs and others who are all seeking the same thing, but they can't find what only Jesus can provide. So make a good decision. Receive the gift of happiness. And the impact of that happiness is actually pretty hard to miss. It's pretty hard to miss. And once again, and I repeat this from time to time, and I want to soften this statement by saying, I know what people mean when they say this. I don't have a problem with what's in their heart and what they're trying to communicate. But when somebody says, I live my life for an audience of one, that's just wrong. That one lives his life through us for that audience of 8 to 15 people sitting on the front row of your theater. So we're looking at these ideas that create impact because we're happier based on the decisions that we make. And last time we looked at the first 2 of these Beatitudes, these attitudes we want to be. Today we're going to look at the next 2. Let's pick up verse 5, and we'll see the third of these 8. Let's read this verse out loud together. I know you want to fill in a blank, and we'll get there in a minute, but I just want you to read this out loud with me. Now, last time I asked you to read out loud with me. Man, we had to do this several times before you all cooperated, so let's try to get it first time, okay? We got other things to talk about. Here we go. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Where will you hear that anywhere but out of Jesus' mouth? Blessed are the meek. Happy are meek people. I mean, where do you get that? This is the point, and you can fill in a blank now. World championships are won through respect. And I'm not talking about sports championships. I'm talking about world championships. Not like, today, later on, there'll be a team on a podium and they'll receive a trophy and they will say that they're the best in the world. This is not about becoming the best in the world. It's about our worlds having the best seat in the house to see the love of Jesus. That's a championship. So here's the decision. Happy are the meek. Here we go. Don't strike back when your feelings are hurt. Say, seriously, that's what that means? Yeah, you'll see it in a minute. And here's the impression. Bless you. You remember you got a decision, and then God gives you happiness. He starts to generate happiness in your spirit. Here's the impression. Bigger people are actually better people. And I'm not talking about guys on the O-line. I'm not talking about the 300-pound guys are better people. I'm talking about people who are bigger people because they take the high road. What's the impression? Man, those people really are better people. Because once again, Jesus living this life, his life through us, makes an impression on them. All right, let's break down what meekness is. It's certainly not weakness. In fact, the opposite is true. Meekness is power, but it's power under control. It means that you maintain a gentle, loving spirit, even when you have both the opportunity and the ability to strike back at someone who hurts you, who offends you. Praus is the word Jesus chooses here. And it would have been used to describe someone who had the ability to open their mouth and scream at someone or to strike at someone. It would never be used to describe anyone forced into being gentle, anyone who was muzzled, forced to keep their mouth shut, because that would be weakness, see. Weakness is not meekness. Praus is the word, and it's the word, another passage in Matthew chapter 11, verse 29. Yeah, in another passage, Jesus chose the exact same word when he described himself. He said, take my yoke upon you, learn this. I'm gentle and humble in heart. I'm praus. Jesus said, that's how I am. Now, would any of us describe Jesus as weak? No, but he was meek. One letter makes, no, 2 letters, I guess, makes huge difference. Huge difference. The word comes from the Greek prates, and it describes the choice to be gentle. It's described elsewhere in the New Testament, in English translation, as self-control. The Greeks were funny people, at a lot of levels. But they would attach a picture with a word in order to help people understand the word. If you had a virtue or a character trait, they would identify that character trait with a picture, a word picture. And for prates, they connected that word to a wild animal whose strength, having been tamed, was no longer being wasted, but focused, and therefore was now useful to other people. See, that's what it means to be meek. We're controlling our power so that we can focus it to accomplish a greater purpose. And like all the statements in the sermon, Jesus is speaking directly to the Jewish people. Had they been able to marshal an army and challenge the Roman military machine, they would have done it. And so what Jesus is doing here is proposing a whole new paradigm, a whole new set of lenses for them to see the reality through. The world does not belong to those who fight, but to those who could fight, but at times choose not to. To be meek means that you have balance. You have a balance between conviction and gentleness. You avoid unnecessary harshness, but you don't compromise what's right. And you're not too slow to use force if necessary, but you're just balanced. So how does this fit in the sequence of the 8 statements? Well, if you remember last time, because we got to look at order. Jesus is delivering the sermon strategically. And he's already told us that happiness comes through mourning. Happiness comes through understanding who you are and who you're not, and recognizing your own sin, your own failures, your own weaknesses, and you're no longer blaming everybody else for your problems, but you're owning your own stuff. It's what it means to mourn your sin. And now, we just admitted we weren't perfect, and now we're going to punish someone who agrees with that. Someone who talks about an imperfection in our life, someone who recognizes a weakness, someone who brings up in a discussion that we might not be perfect, and that offends us, and so we're going to punish them for the exact same thing we just confessed to God. And Jesus said, what kind of sense is that, man? Happy are those who are meek. They could strike back, but they're not going to. Because there's a greater call on their life to make an impact for Christ. And they're going to inherit the earth. Inheritance is a reference to gaining influence, developing friendships. I mean, people, just that influence grows with the people around you. And keep in mind, an inheritance is not something you take from anybody. You can't take an inheritance. An inheritance has to be given to you, and it's given to you maybe when your family croaks, I don't know, when they die, and you receive this inheritance that they have set aside for you. Maybe they would give you your inheritance before they die. A lot of families do that. I think that's pretty cool. So they can actually enjoy the distribution, enjoy the gift-giving side of that. But you can't take an inheritance. It's something you're given. People will give you respect. They will give you the love, the influence you desire when you're willing to admit to them what is already clear to them. Y'all aren't perfect. You're a sinful, mistake-prone person. So when somebody brings that up and you begin to feel, a little bit offended, and your weakness becomes a topic of conversation, don't, hit. Don't strike back, even though you have the ability to. It's funny to me how we so quickly become offended, even when people tell the truth about us. Simon Sinek, not a believer, at least to my knowledge, but he made a real interesting comment in his book on finding the why of life. It's a great book, but anyway, Simon Sinek said there are only 2 ways to influence human behavior. You can manipulate it or you can inspire it. You can change the world around you by manipulating people or by inspiring people. And I broke down, in relationship to this idea of meekness, a little chart for you. If you're like me, you think visually, and I like charts, but there's a motive here. I can manipulate you. I can make you change your behavior. All I need is like a 45 or a 357. I can point it at you. I could leverage power over you. And you know what? Your response, you would change your behavior. If I said stop, you would stop. If I said go, you would go. Move to the right, to the right, to the left, to the left. And you would do so quickly. But the benefit would be short term. If I wanted you to move, as soon as the gun was gone, I put the gun down or I lost the access to the weapon. As soon as the gun was gone, the benefit that I felt I would receive would go away, a short-term benefit. And then after all was said and done and we both walked away, how would you feel about me? You would resent me. See, that's what happens with power. That's what happens when you try to manipulate people. They don't like being played. You don't like being played, I don't like being played. All God's children don't like being played. And it just leads to resentment. That's why you don't want to play this game. Don't want to play the power game, the manipulation game. So what does meekness bring to the table? Well, look at the other side of that. We want to inspire people to change. And yet it's not through power, it's through influence. I don't want to take power over you. Watch how I word that. I don't want to take power over you. I want you to give me influence, because power you take, influence you receive as people give it to you. It's just like an inheritance. But it takes a long time to develop influence. It takes trust. You got to build trust over time. You got to make a lot of good decisions, a lot of meek decisions over time. But the benefit, it's not short term. The benefit is what? It's eternal, bro. You changed lives forever. Your kids will forever be different. It's a funny thing about raising kids. You can take power for a while till they're bigger than you, till they make more money than you. When they make more money than you, what are you going to say? I'm not going to give you your allowance. When they drive a nicer car than you, what are you going to say? Give me the keys. See, you lose power. And the only way you have a relationship is if you've developed what? Influence. See, you've got long-term benefits. And what's the reaction when all the dust settles? Do they resent you? No, they respect you, man. That's where world championships are won. Through respect. So don't impose your will on others simply because you can. And you say, well, I'm never going to pull a gun on anybody. I hope not. That's like so lame. But how do we use power in our relationships when we would never go to that extreme? Oh, I made a little list. I don't know. You can add to it if you want to. Physicality. You know, maybe we don't use a weapon. Maybe we do. Maybe we don't. But we don't use a weapon. We're bigger. We're louder. Physicality. We can use that. We interrupt people in a discussion. You ever done that? Can take power. This conversation is over. It will now become a monologue. And the only one that has something worth saying is me. So just shut up. I'm sorry. We don't use that term. Shut up. I've told that. It's good. Shouldn't. That's taking power over people, so shouldn't do that. I'll be chastised later for even mentioning it. We look for others who agree with us. Why do we look for others to agree with us? Have we ever said there's influence in numbers? No, we say there's power in numbers. So we always look for people who agree with us. And then we kind of leverage that in a discussion because other people agree with us, not you. And then we walk away. What are you saying to somebody when you walk away from a conversation? You're not important to me. When you refuse to listen to them, your opinion, it really doesn't matter to me. I mean, you can all you want, but I'm a little above the drones of people like you. It's how we take power. Yeah, that's not a good idea. Don't be short-sighted. See, you can win the argument today, but you're not trying to win the argument today. You're trying to change people's minds for the rest of tomorrow's. So Jesus said, the future doesn't belong to those who fight. The future belongs to those who could but choose not to. RESPCT. It's all about respect. And then let's look at the next one. Number 4, because number 4 in the list of 8, really it's only the second one we're talking about today. But you don't get points for first downs. See, what would you rather do? Out first down the other team. Let's say you got to understand football a little bit, so forgive me if you're at a disadvantage and you're not a fan, but If your team has 30 first downs and the other team has 20 first downs, but the other team doesn't need first downs because they got like 900 yards passing and 5 80-yard touchdown passes, and they beat you by 21 points, would you rather win the first down game, or would you rather win the game? See. Let's read the verse together out loud. Blessed, all of us, here we go. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. A lot of you folks are trying to win the battle of the first down, and it's a bigger game than you think. So don't be short-sighted. Here's the decision. Stay committed to the game plan, because we're thinking long term. Don't panic. Stay committed to the game plan, and here's the impression people get. Right commitment leads to real contentment. You're committed to the right things. That's why you're happy. They're committed to the wrong things. That's why they're not. This is a simple formula. And when Jesus talks about hungering and thirsting for righteousness, he's not talking about a hankering for a mid-afternoon snack. He's not talking about instinctively taking a drink of water from that plastic bottle next to your computer, or like me, I got Pastor Tom, got the nectar of life right here on display each weekend, just in case I need it. This is iced tea, by the way. Non-alcoholic iced tea, by the way. We talk about hunger and thirst. We're talking about desperation. It's not that little twinge in your stomach. It's going without food for a long time, and now you are like hungry. It's like being deprived of water for a long time, and now you thirst. See, there's that desperation inherent in the scenario he's describing. I tell church leaders, just last week we had a group of 8 church staff teams on our campus, and we're talking about leadership principles. And I tell groups like them all the time, people don't ask the right questions till they're desperate. But when you're desperate, you start asking the right questions. Everybody's hungry and thirsty for something. So that's really the question. What's driving you? I mean, we all want a lot of things, but there are some things we go after as if our very survival depends on it. I gotta have that, or I'm not gonna be happy, right? I gotta get that car, gotta get that house, gotta get that job, gotta get that. Gotta get that phone, or I'm not gonna be happy. What are you going after with that level of passion? And Jesus said, if you want to be happy, then that thing needs to be righteousness. Dikaiosune is the Greek word for righteousness, and it refers more than simply doing the right things because God said it's right. God says it's right, so you got to do it. See, our Heavenly Father is not like earthly fathers and mothers, like you and I, because we play that game with our children. They say, why do I have to do that, man? We say, because I said so. And the reason we say because I said so is we can't think of a good reason. And so we play the power card. I just want you to know something about God. He's not playing the power card with us. He's not insecure. He doesn't need you to jump through hoops just so he can feel good about the fact that he's God and you're not. He never asks you to do anything that is not systemically connected to making an impression on those people sitting on the front row of your life. Because that's the mission. And when he says you need to hunger and thirst for righteousness, there's a reason for that. Actually, this word is a reference to the state of things as they were, it was intended to be. So what does that mean? Okay, a couple weeks ago, our trash compactor broke. And so I wanted to return our trash compactor to a state of righteousness, where it functioned as the designer designed it to function. So the repair man comes out. He's got all the pieces on the floor, and he's actually laying down and working the wires and putting bolts and screws together, and he's following this very specific set of directions. A game plan, if you will. In order to get that trash compactor back to the state in which it was designed to function. And in Jesus' terms, to return it to a state of righteousness, dikaiosune. See, the problem in our culture is that people are going after things that can't satisfy their hunger. They're hungry, and they think something will satisfy that deep longing in their spirit, but it can't. Those consistent pangs of dissatisfaction continue to haunt them. And the more they go after that happiness ideal, the more emptiness they actually feel. Eric Hoffer said this. I love this quote. He said, "You can never get enough of what you don't need to make you happy." So many of you guys going after stuff, you don't even need it for happiness. And it's just a huge distraction to pursuing what you do need to pursue to enjoy life fully. People are driven to make more money because they think it'll satisfy them. Jesus knows money won't satisfy them because money can't satisfy them. It's not a matter of money not being satisfying. It can't be satisfying. We know that because we know Jesus. Remember, Jesus is right about everything. He told us that. And if he's right about everything, he's right about that. So we, as Christians, we hear that and we say, oh yeah, I believe that. Well, if we know what Jesus knows, why do we act like we're still ignorant? Why are we still going after what they're going after? We go after what they're going after, non-believers go after, as if we're as naive as they are. What kind of impression is made by a course of action that is no different than the world? By meteors that simply skip off the atmosphere and back into space. You know, thousands do that every day. But when one enters the atmosphere and doesn't burn on entry and then hits and makes an impact, that's what people notice. Quarterback decides at the last second to change the play that was called. Coach calls a play. Quarterback takes it into his own hands to change the play. It's called an audible, calling an audible at the line of scrimmage. It might slightly change the predetermined play, or it might completely scrap the predetermined play for a new play. Here's a question for you. Why does Jesus call a play and we think we can call an audible? See, if I asked you whether or not, as a Christian, and I'm talking to you now as if you are, if you believe that buying that new whatever it is that you're going to buy, if you believe that that would make you happy and truly satisfy you and help you to find and discover Macar, if I said, do you think that's going to provide that for you? You would instinctively say, no, Tom, because material possessions don't bring happiness. And then so many of you would still go ahead and pursue it as if it does. And I'm not just talking about new cars, new houses, new phones, because it might actually be God's will for you to have those at different times in your life. I don't know. But going into those purchases, you have to understand they will never bring you closer to Macar. Unless you've learned to use whatever it is you pursue to focus on the mission that Jesus gave you. Are you happy with your old car? Because if you're not happy with your old car, you won't be happy with your new car. Are you using your old car missionally? Because if you're not, you won't use the new car missionally. Are you using the old house to pursue the mission God's given you to reach your world for Christ? Then if you're not, he's not going to have any reason whatsoever to bless you with the new one. You can pursue it. You can be hungry and you can be hangry if you don't get it. Most of our aspirations are not for things that will help us elevate the gospel. They're aspirations for things that actually derail the gospel in our lives. I mean, this is the strategy of the enemy. For example, if the added expense of any commodity keeps you away from your family because now you got to work twice as hard, Or buying that, whatever it is, keeps you away from church because now you got to work Saturdays to pay for it, and so your entire weekend is compressed into Sundays, and so now you don't have time for church. You don't have time to get your family involved in church. Or if buying that, whatever it is, keeps you from being able to tithe and live generously toward others because now you got to pay so much you can't give anything. Not a righteous decision, bro. Because now that choice, that decision, is a decision you would expect the rest of the world to make. And it's compromising the calling that God has placed on your life. God would never lead a believer into a circumstance that would compromise their mission. Never. The word filled, it means to feed or to fatten. As you would feed cattle. You ever seen anxious cattle? And I know they're out there, but I just never run into them. Cattle I run into are all just grazing in the field. They're just happy because they're getting fat. Blessed are the cattle. Man, they're just getting filled up. You know, Jesus wants to give you more than you need. You know that, right? We're going after what compromises his purpose in your life simply won't get you where you want to be. God wants more for you than you want for you. This weekend, in fact, today would have been my parents' 69th wedding anniversary. For the last 8 years, my mother's been celebrating it without my dad because he's with the Lord now. So I talked to her last night. You know, wish her happy anniversary. And so we start talking about stories, sitting around, reminiscing about, PF, Pastor Frank, my dad. One of my favorite stories, I've shared it with you years ago, I shared it with you, but it was for my first car. I was 16 years old, a couple of months before I graduated. I turned 16, a couple months before I graduated from high school. So my friends are virtually, the whole group of them, are 18. They've been driving for a couple of years. They've been dating for a couple of years. I've been doing neither. And so when I turned 16, I was pretty driven, no pun intended, to get a car. And so my friend Rick, who had picked me up for school a few times over the course of that last year, our senior year, he was selling his 1957 Chevy. And I was all about it, man, because I thought it was a pretty cool car. I mean, I know you could see the road through the floorboard, but it was only $300, right? And I had saved $300. I had a job. You could get a job in the state of California and be paid for a job at 15 and a half. And I'd been working for 6 months to earn money for my first car. And I had $300, but I knew my dad would have to weigh in before the deal could be closed. So I said, Dad, will you go and look at this car at Rick's house? He said, yeah, he knew Rick. Rick was in the youth group that he led. My heart was beating. We're pulling up into Rick's driveway, and there's the 57 Chevy. It's dark green, man. It looked better than it actually ran, but it was just such a sweet first car. My dad looked it over, and he said, I don't think it's a car for you. I said, well, what do you mean? He said, I don't know. I just don't have peace about it. I don't think you ought to buy it. I said, well, I kind of think that's my decision, isn't it? Because I got the money in my bank account, and I could pay cash for it. I'm just trying to understand, Dad, why you're not thinking like I'm thinking. He said, I just don't want you to get this car. Man, that was a quiet ride home. In fact, I did not speak to my father for the next 5 days. 5 days later, he walks into my room, uninvited. And I was 100% sure I was going to get a lecture from him on how we're supposed to respect our parents, because I'd had a few of those in my life. But instead of lecturing me, he threw a set of keys on the bed. Keys to a 1969 Mustang with a 351 Cleveland V8 engine. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. He said to me, I've been working on a way to get this Mustang for you for the past couple of months. I didn't want to say anything the other night. at Rick's house because I didn't want to ruin the surprise. High gloss cherry red, fastback, rear hijacker air shocks. Can I hear a testimony? Any old dudes out there remember the hijackers? Custom wheels. And to top it all off, car had air conditioning. Air conditioning. Dude, this was 1970. Remember, this is a 1969 Mustang. This car was 1 year old. Can I tell you how many of my friends had air conditioning in their cars? Nada. In 1 minute's time, I went from academic nerd, which actually hadn't yet delivered many perks, to driving one of the fastest and not just one of the most beautiful, certainly the coolest, because that air conditioning, certainly the coolest cars in my public high school. Now, you need to understand something. My dad was an associate pastor at a Baptist church, and this is in 1970 when guys in this particular business got paid virtually nothing. To this day, I have no idea how he pulled that deal off financially. And it might be overstating the obvious to say that I started speaking to him again shortly after that conversation. Now, why do I tell you that story? Well, I love that story. I could tell it every day just to remember my dad. But this is the reason I tell it to you. See, I was passionately pursuing happiness at Rick's house. Go figure. I didn't know any better. And all along, I had a loving father who wanted more for me. Because what a loving dad wants for his children, more than anything, is to make them happy. And I just say, some of you did not have a loving dad like I did growing up. But you got one now. Because God the Father loves you more than you love you. You know, when I think back that day, you know, in my room, there were two of us in that room sharing that conversation. I was the second happiest one there. I think my dad, one of the happiest days of his life. Do you understand how happy it makes God to bless you? If you would only let him bless you. And Father, I pray we will. Just rattle our cage, Father. Help us not to strike back when offended, but to be gentle and loving. Even though we can. Man, we can win that fight, we can win that argument, but more than that, Lord, we want to win that heart for you. And help us to pursue with that hunger and that thirst the righteousness of God. Help us to stick to the game plan. And we know it plays your call, and sometimes they're a little controversial, but man, they work over the long haul. Some of you don't know Christ today. You don't know what it's like to know God, because there's only one way to know God, and that's through Jesus. Here we go. Admit that you're a sinner. Believe Jesus, only Jesus can save you. And choose to place your faith in Jesus. Lord, I admit that. Lord, I believe that. And Lord, I choose that. In Jesus' great name. All God's children said.